Hello everyone, it's History Behind the Warrior, and as always, welcome back to yet another Mortal Kombat video. Now of course, with us still coming off the hype of the Mortal Kombat 2 reveal, you guys knew I had to make a video on it, I knew I had to make a video on it, and that's discussing and breaking down the most recent controversial change, with that of the Emerald Guardian and Countess, Jade. Now if there's anything you know about me is that I'm actually a pretty big advocate for Jade. I've been so since MKX up until the events of 11, which was nice, but admittedly I thought she played like shit in that game. With that said though, in her absence in MK1, I was naturally once again thrust into the same position of, that sucks, she's not here. But then I heard her inclusion for the MK2 movie, and I was like, awesome, can't wait to see her return. But little did I actually know of the monkey's paw that was curling in my hand, giving her a pretty drastic design change and making her bald for the first time ever. So today we're going to be breaking it down, what could possibly be going on with this design and choice, my personal overall feelings on this design as a longtime fan, as well as a lot of other lingering issues surrounding this, as I feel there's been a lot of bad faith arguments and fluff that are really taking away from the core criticism and issues presented to us here. Now mind you, I have briefly elaborated on quite a few of these points in prior videos, but I really wanted to kind of streamline and expand it all in a more concise video, adding to what I said previously and prevent it from sounding like a disjointed and cobbled together mess. So first off, let's talk about Jade herself, and what version we're actually talking about here. What canon does she line up to? Well, with the conquest of Edenia, this does more or less confirm that it will be lining up with the original canon of games, from Mortal Kombat 1 all the way up to 11, more or less discarding any new narrative ideas associated with that of the new era. So what's really established or known with Jade here? Well, if this is indeed the direction they're going in, then Jade is a child of war, having been one of many of Shao's many conquested accolades. A treasure, so to say. Now for the uninitiated, or those who may not be familiar with Mortal Kombat, the Khan and Conqueror of Worlds seeks greater power by taking other lands for his own, because by merging them together with that of his own, it's able to greatly amplify his power, incentivizing further conquest, whilst also feeding his power and ego, something that does kind of go hand in hand with his character. And whilst these conquests typically result in the utter annihilation of the opposing monarchy, Shao isn't without mercy, if you can really call it that, because in his twisted desire to somewhat have trophies of his onslaught, Shao would disintegrate a large number of the population before enslaving the rest beneath him, fashioning them into weapons of war beneath his will, with Kitana and Jade having been the remnants of that massacre. And with the death of Sindel, the two were more or less raised beneath the hand of the Emperor. But with Kitana having been of royal blood, the Emperor was interested in adopting the child as his daughter, as he originally intended to marry her mother, Sindel. Jade, on the other hand, wasn't put in quite the same position, but still remained very close to that of the princess, serving as her bodyguard, and someone that was ordered by the Khan to keep a close eye on her. Thus, throughout millennia, Jade grew up being loyal to that of the Emperor, but her friendship with Kitana always tied the two at the hip. Thus, at later points in time, when Kitana strayed from the Emperor's side, Jade would inevitably follow. So that very brief story retrospective covered here, how exactly is that reflected here? Well, from what we do see, we still have the conquest of Edenia, as well as the death of King Jared by Shao Kahn, so no MK11 shenanigans happening here I suppose. And this all results in the enslavement of the Edenian people, with Sindel, Kitana and Jade having been his treasures of war. So, why is Jade Bald here? Well, honestly I don't know. As of right now, the somewhat clarity of this situation has been shrouded in a veil of mystery. The only thing we know for sure is that this creative decision wasn't implemented without narrative purpose, as the movie's producer Todd Gardner has gone out and confirmed the film will explain this, signifying that this was a conscious decision, not created without purpose or thought. Because think about it realistically, if such a choice was taken without purpose, this would be so much worse. But it's ultimately now how such an idea is tackled to justify such a narrative decision and drastic design changes. Whilst her hair has never been quite as important to her character as, let's say, Sindel, who physically implements it into her repertoire, it's more so something symbolic of the Edenian people, who are associated with beauty, femininity, and somewhat immortality. But why am I mentioning this? Well, I have a theory that this has all been narratively interwoven into this character change. Because you see, when it comes to Shao's conquests across the realms, it isn't so much about breaking their worlds and merging it with his own, but also breaking their people. Zalterra was stripped of its matriarchal figure, because without her, her spawn are directionless, becoming increasingly dependent on a new leading figure, or they wind up turning more and more feral. Another example of this would be Tarkata, where once it's conquered by Shao, they have it so their people's leader, Baraka, fully submits to the Khan, in exchange for his people's protection and somewhat preservation. And even the Edenians in-game feel this up to a certain extent, being driven to near extinction, robbed of their heritage and stripped of any knowledge of their previous home. But that's why I think here they've added an extra layer to that tragedy. In my mind, I don't think that Shao just robbed them of Edenia, but he stripped them of their identity. He robbed them of their beauty and their traits, to immediately enroll them into his army with no purpose or knowledge of their home, with the only treasure now having been Kitana, and possibly Sindel. However, this creative decision isn't all squeaky clean in my mind. Because you see, Shao, whilst a big brute, isn't a dull single-minded idiot. Whilst compelled by a greater force to conquer, he very evidently has his own desires and interests. Sindel being a perfect example as he looked to take her as his wife. And knowing the nature of Shao, it wouldn't entirely be out of character for him to honestly having taken Edenia just for Sindel alone, as it kills two birds with one stone for him. My point is that he does see the value of Edenians, in both their beauty, skill, and immortality. So to strip him of that, I don't know if I agree with that decision. Because this is also clearly a character that has a concubine of women on, literally. So I don't think that this is the direction he'd go in, considering his taste in women. Now, from a personal former fan perspective, I will say that from a costume design aesthetic, it's very MK and feels very in line with the more modern designs. And I feel it translates over quite well, especially with the mask on, as I do feel like it completes the look. So as a whole, I think from a costume design perspective, it's solid, it's very good. But without it, are where my problems do arise. Because the bald-headedness of this all does break the immersion for me. Not just because of a design decision, but because of the actress. Now, just to elaborate, I have no issue with Tati Gabrielle as the actress. In fact, I do actually think she's a strong choice for the role, as I've seen her in various different roles beforehand, so I know she's going to kill it. But my biggest gripe here is how this design decision has had it so the casting does supersede the character. Because when I look at Jade, I struggle to see Jade. I see Tati Gabrielle dressing up as the character, not the character in this universe. Now that's no real fault of her own, but the reason why I say this is a problem is because the actress does have a very similar haircut in real life. Hence why I'm struggling to see the character and not the actress here. Because here's the thing, when I see her wearing that mask in the promotional posters, I think she looks great. Like I said, it really completes the design, and helped sell me on this being one of the 3 female ninjas. But without it, I don't see the character but Tati herself. And whilst narratively this can indeed be justified, and can most certainly add a new layer of devastation to the Edenian people, as a fan of the character, I don't think this is a direction I would have gone in. Especially when it comes to on-screen depictions of Jade, as the only previous incarnation we've had was all the way back from Mortal Kombat Annihilation, which is a horrible depiction of the character, as it's completely inaccurate, having leaned more into the Asian-influenced design, as well as her character being completely different, as she's a traitorous scoundrel that betrays Kitana and Liu Kang. My point is that creatively, I don't think adding a new layer of tragedy to Edenia is a bad thing. If anything, I do actually think it's pretty good and pretty solid. And whilst I think it can be justified in universe, I don't know if that translates well over to the character. Especially when you keep in mind the people who have longed for an accurate on-screen depiction. As ridiculous as it is just hair and I don't think it's law-breaking at all. I think sometimes creating a narrative decision or scenario that does kind of come at the cost of a character like the whole evil Sindel thing, which only strictly works for the Aftermath expansion, can be quite detrimental, putting it in a make or break situation. Truth be told, we don't know how this is handled up until we see it be executed. Because again, much like Evil Sindel, whilst I don't like it as it goes against the lore, it led to a really thrilling expansion that somewhat allowed me to overlook those problems and issues. I only hope that the same kind of approach is given to Jade here, because again, whilst it is simply just hair, it does conflict with the associated beauty of the Edenians. So it's ultimately the execution here that will determine on how I feel it's delivered. So with that said, this kind of covers my thoughts and feelings regarding this topic in a more streamlined, expanded video. I wanted to go a little bit more in depth and at least have other characters I could touch on to compare her to show what bits kind of work, what bits kind of don't, as well as acknowledge my own personal issues that are kind of going on with this, because I see it at like a bunch of different angles and ways it can be tackled, and justified even if I don't actually agree with that decision. With that said, I will very quickly touch on this and I won't go too in depth, but I do think that a lot of talk in Discord surrounding this has kind of been lost in the internet ether for clickbait and rage bait, and a lot of people kind of using this as a bit of a scapegoat, when truth be told there's actually issues with this that lie so much deeper than simply going, wow, this cosplayer's hot, why doesn't she look like that? There's a little bit more than that, guys, come on. But I do feel like that is a topic in itself that does need to be discussed regarding fan service in fighting games. Because there's ways of most certainly handling it and doing it well and quite tastefully, and doing it in just an abhorrent way. But alas, that is a topic for another video. So with that said and everything covered here, what are your thoughts on the whole Bald Jade situation? Are you for it? Are you against it? How do you think they're going to justify it in universe? And what are your overall thoughts on the film as a whole from what we've seen? Please do comment down below, as I'd love to hear what you have to say, as I thought this was a pretty fun opinion piece to put together, as well as a way to kind of string my own personal thoughts and feelings with that of the mythos. But until the next one everyone, that's been it for me. So as always, take care, and I'll catch you in the next one.